Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 18th Annual Lake Association Summit. I know that we have people filtering in, but I want to be respectful of presenters' time, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Lauren Dye, and I'm the Associate Director for the Watershed Council, and I will be facilitating our summit today. So, of course, we always have to cover our Zoom housekeeping rules. We have asked that you mute yourselves and turn your video off so that there's no distraction during the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentations, you are welcome to type your questions in the chat, or during question time, you will be able to use the raise my hand feature that's located at the bottom of the screen to raise your hand and ask your question in person, in which we ask that you take yourself off mute and turn your video on. We currently don't have any scheduled breaks in our agenda because we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for the presentations that we're all here to listen to. But please take breaks as you need. This summit is being recorded, and the link will be available within the week. So if there is anything that you miss, that will be available to you. If we do have some time before the breakout sessions, I will try to give us a break at that time. So first up, I want the Watershed Council staff to introduce themselves. So I've already introduced myself, and I'm going to let them go around one by one and let you know who they are.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer McKay. I am the Chief Policy and Government Affairs Director.
My name is Anna McGlashan, and I am the Local Policy Manager.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcella Domka. I'm the Water Resources Manager.
Good morning, I'm Noah Jansen, and I'm the Restoration Manager.
And good morning again. My name is Andrea Coronado, and I'm the Communications and Development Director.
Hi, my name is Cala Beers, and I'm the Water Resources and Communications Specialist.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Watson, and I am a Water Resources Specialist.
Hi, I'm Corey Alanese, and I'm the Operations Specialist.
Good morning, I'm Natalie Wells, and I'm the Office Manager.
Great, thank you guys. We do have a couple staff that are not present that I wanted to recognize. Kim Baker is our Interim Manager, Kevin Chrisman, our Finance Director, Eli Baker, our Education Manager, and Emily Johnson, our Water Resource Specialist. You can find contact information for any of our staff on our website, and we welcome any involvement with you all. All right. Next up, I wanted to highlight the folks that we had RSVP for our event today. We had many people RSVP, not only within our service area, but also outside of our service area. So I pulled out the lake associations from our RSVP list, and we have a list here that I just kind of want to share with everyone that of those lake associations that I represented. If you are a member of a lake association and you don't see your name on this list, go ahead and put that in the chat so we can, recognize everyone that's here today. You don't have to be a member of a lake association to be able to attend this event. However, we do try to arrange this meeting for topics that are related to the lake associations that we serve within our service area. So because this event is virtual, it does allow us to reach a lot more people, which we think is fantastic. But we are always gearing this towards those lake associations that we serve. So I'm glad to hear that there are many other lake associations that are interested in the topic of septics. And so we hope that you get something out of this today as well. Because our Lake Association Summit has moved to a virtual format, we did create an additional event for lake associations to allow everyone to come together in person to do some networking. And we hosted our first event of that earlier this summer called Linking Lakes, and it went over really, really well, and we got some really positive feedback on that. And so that is an event we intend to carry forward as an annual event. So please stay tuned for that. With that in mind, we will probably move our Lake Association Summit to a spring event, and then Linking Lakes, where you can network in person sometime over the summer. So we are looking forward to having that for you all. And again, we thought it was a really great event that I think a lot of lake associations got something out of. So we hope that you will join us for those events in 2024. So thank you to those lake associations that we have represented today. Okay, next, for anyone that is not familiar who we are at the Watershed Council, our mission is to speak for Northern Michigan's waters. And so we are dedicated to protecting our lakes, streams, wetlands, and groundwater through research, restoration, monitoring, education, and advocacy. Our offices are located downtown Petoskey, and we are open to the public. So if you are ever in the area, please come in and see us. This here is a map of our service area. We serve the 4 main counties of Sheboygan, Emmett, Charlevoix, and Antrim. But we do work on a watershed basis, so we do serve those watersheds that kind of jump outside of those political boundaries. We also like to recognize that our service area lies within the traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe, and we will continue to work alongside them to honor and protect this area for the next 7 generations. We are also lucky to be able to protect a wealth of water resources within this area and high quality water resources at that. So we accomplish our mission through several different ways. We kind of do all things, as I always kind of summarize, it's all things water quality protection. So we do sound science, so we conduct research and monitoring on our waters through respected advocacy. So we have staff that work in the policy world, so they're working at the state level and locally. Education, many of you may be familiar with our Watershed Academy, in which we work with high schoolers to get them out in the stream. We are also working on expanding those educational programs. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us about that if you're interested in working with us. We also conduct several restoration projects on the ground, so things like road stream crossings, rain gardens, and things of that nature. So we really do accomplish a lot within our organization, and it's a lot in work that we are proud of. We really appreciate the relationships that we have with lake associations and other agencies in order to accomplish our work. We recognize that this is not something that we can accomplish on our own, and it takes a village in order to help us protect our waters. I invite everyone to participate in our watershed advisory committees that we have. We have them for all of our watersheds within our service area. And these meetings and groups have the focus of implementing watershed management plans, which is watershed protection. This is a pretty informal group. So if you are just interested in hearing what's going on within the watershed, I encourage you to attend those. We meet anywhere from 3 to 5 times a year. And if you are interested in joining for your watershed, please send me an email and we can get you on that email list so you can receive that information. Okay, so the theme for this year's summit is septic systems. The Watershed Council's history with septic issues began decades ago. The state of Michigan has been grappling with how to address septic pollution for more than 2 decades. The Watershed Council policy team has been engaged in the statewide conversations on how to enact statewide septic codes since its inception. In addition, it became obvious that in the absence of state action, local ordinances would be imperative. This led to the Septic Question Project, as well as the development of the Elk River Channel Lake Septic Subcommittee. The Septic Question was designed to review septic policies in place and examine potential policy options for septic regulation and education. Final reports were completed and shared with each of the 4 counties within our service area, and you can find those links in the chat. Since then, the Elk River Channel Lake Septic Subcommittee has been active in both attempting to get local municipalities to enact local ordinances while providing input and guidance into statewide legislative processes. The Watershed Council has also expanded efforts based upon what we accomplished and learned in Antrim County to other communities within our service area. It has been a very long and concerted effort that has involved state partners such as the Michigan Environmental Council and many local collaborators, including the Health Department of Northwest Michigan, local lake associations, representatives from local government, and other nonprofits. We are very proud of our work to date, but there is much more to be done to address the risks associated with septic systems. So thank you all for being here today to educate yourself. With that, we're going to kick off our presentation. And first up, we're going to hear from Casey Clement on Septic Systems 101. Casey Clement is a graduate of the Environmental Health Program at Central Michigan University and has a registered environmental health specialist certification. She has worked in the Environmental Health Division of the Health Department of Northwest Michigan since 2014. Living in Bel Air with her husband and dog, Casey tries to take advantage of the numerous outdoor recreation opportunities in the area. Thank you very much for joining us today, Casey. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And then hopefully this. Okay, so I am going to talk about septic systems this morning, and it sounds like that's the overall theme for this presentation. And here's just a quick outline of what we're going to be talking about today. So as far as septic systems go, we'll just talk about the basics. So most septic systems are comprised of a septic tank and a drain field. That the septic can include additional components as needed and as different codes require. But for the main part, we'll just kind of focus on the basics today. And if you have questions about additional components, feel free to ask. So with this septic tank, let me move this so you guys can see this picture. The primary function of the septic tank is to allow for retention time and settling. So anything that goes down the drain in your house goes out to your septic system or to your septic system and first to your septic tank. So the primary goal of that septic tank is retention time. For household use, we want a minimum of 24 hours of retention time. And we size that septic tank based on the number of bedrooms in the home, which kind of speaks to the flow that we would expect. So once that wastewater enters your septic tank, solids settle to the bottom, your fats, oils, and greases float on top, and that middle clarifying layer is what goes out to your drain field. Our department recommends pumping your septic tank every 3 to 5 years or based on the use of the home. And the thought behind that is that as you're using normal water and wastewater in your home, this solid level is going to build up. So over time, if you don't pump out your tank, that solid level is going to build up. That'll include part of your tank. So then you have less retention time. So if you don't pump out your tank, you have more of a chance of suspended solids going out to your field or some fats, oils, and greases. And then from your tank, that middle clarifying layer goes out to your drain field. So most drain fields are comprised of perforated pipe and drain field stone. And they can be other materials as permitted. Underneath our sanitary code, which serves Antrim, Charlevoix, Emmett, and Otsego counties, that drain field stone has to be 4 feet to any evidence of seasonal high groundwater and 5 feet to any impervious or limiting strata. And that impervious or limiting strata includes clay, peat, muck, or marl. The theory behind that is that if you have your bottom of drain field stone 4 feet above groundwater, it allows time for bacteria, naturally occurring bacteria in the soil, to kind of break down that wastewater and cleanse and treat it before it enters that groundwater table. In addition, our drain fields have to be 100 feet to any surface water, and surface water includes lakes, streams, or creeks. One of the big things to speak about for a septic system is it does require maintenance. You know, you can install it, but it is something to think about. We touched on with your septic tank to pump it out every 3 to 5 years or based on the use of the home. Other things are we don't want to park or drive over the drain field. That can lead to compaction, which can potentially shorten the life of the field. In addition to parking and driving over the drain field, we don't ever want to snowplow or remove snow over the field. that snow actually acts as an insulating layer and can help protect your drain field from freezing in the winter months. Another big thing to keep in mind is be mindful of what is going down your drains. Anything that you put down your drain eventually makes it out to your septic system. So that can have a big impact. There are different handouts and information online about what you should or should not be putting down your drains. But some things to keep in mind are if you are using cleaning products, just be mindful of what's going down there. We don't recommend water softeners being tied into your septic system. One, it can alter the chemistry, and two, some of those water softeners do have quite a large volume when they regenerate, and your system isn't designed to handle that on top of the normal water coming from the home. Flushable wipes is kind of a new topic. I know a lot of them are billed as septic safe, but I would not suggest flushing them. You can dispose of them in other ways. And then moving on down the list, one of the newer trends I'm seeing is landscaping, hardscaping, and trying to, one, hide the drain field or make it pretty. So with that drain field, you do have stone and perforated pipe. So we recommend keeping trees or any vegetation with woody roots about 10 to 20 feet from your drain field. If we think about this summer, we didn't get much rain at all. And if you are in your home using water, that drain field is a constant source of water for the nearby vegetation. So one of the biggest causes of drain field failure that I see is root intrusion, is that in the summer, we don't have rain. Those trees are pretty good about finding their way into that pipe and soaking up that water and nutrients. So like I said, we don't recommend trees or woody vegetation 10 to 20 feet around your field. You can put plants that have like herbaceous roots. I wouldn't plant anything that wants to have what you would call wet feet, because they'd probably be more at risk of growing into your field. In addition, we don't want extensive hardscaping around your field. You know, some of what I'm seeing are like these big boulders or patio stones or paving stones. You do want to not cover that field and allow it to breathe. And then in addition, we never recommend irrigating on top of your drain field, where I know that if you have your drain field and it's covered with lawn or turf grass, it's nice if it's green and matches the rest of the lawn. However, that drain field is not designed to take on that additional water from the irrigation, in addition to the gallons it was designed for based on the household use. And now to some trends that we are seeing. I have been here since 2014, and some of the trends that I have noticed are we had a lot of cabins around the lakes, and now it seems like the cabins are being demoed and new construction is being built, or cabins are wanting to be added onto. What that means as far as the septic goes is underneath our district sanitary code is that if you are proposing a change of use to a structure, and a change of use includes tearing down and rebuilding, adding additional bedrooms, or adding or expanding greater than 50% of the existing square footage, that is the trigger to update the septic system. So with some of the new development that we are seeing is a lot of these older septics are being replaced with newer septics around the lakes as new construction and development is happening. In addition to that new development, additions, remodels, tear downs, rebuilds, we are seeing a lot more people. Some of the trends that I saw is during COVID, a lot of people were up here living in their second homes and working from home. In addition, maybe it wasn't just the homeowner, but they had some of their extended family up with them too. And then that kind of goes into the third thing, is that the use of homes have changed. I know short-term rentals is a new hot button topic. We do see a fair amount of short-term rentals around here. And right now, there's not really a subset for that underneath our district sanitary code or the statewide commercial code. So it is something that we are aware of and kind of looking at. Some other trends we are seeing is that, especially for new construction, septics are kind of an afterthought. Is homes are trying to be built from offset to offset. So that's to the building offset to property lines, the zoning offset, is that it appears that owners are trying to maximize the space for their house and then trying to squeeze in a septic system. So our department is trying to work with local builders to get them on board that the space for the septic has to be part of that planning, the site plan for the new build, is that we have to make sure that we can install a septic that meets code, that is accessible, and then try to design the house, the driveway, and any accessory structures around that. And that brings me to the final trend we are seeing, is that we are seeing a lot more accessory structures that are proposed to have living space in them. So those accessory structures can be like a detached garage with living space or a second dwelling on the property. But these are all some of the trends that I am starting to see in the septic permitting world. I wanted to touch on time of transfer. I'm sure many of you know that Torch Lake Township just adopted a time of transfer that went into effect earlier this month. And I'll just speak to time of transfer in Antrim County because that's where I work. So Milton Township adopted a time of transfer in 2012. The Village of Elk Rapids adopted a time of transfer in 2018, and Torch Lake Township just came on board. As part of that time of transfer service, our department writes annual reports that kind of capture the number of time of transfers that were completed that year, as well as kind of what we saw during those services. That includes water sample results, any failures that we saw in septic systems. The reports also include any recommendations that we have to help extend the lifespan of that system. So annual reports are available on our website at nwhealth.org. And if you have any questions reading those, you're welcome to reach out to me. And I wanted to touch on our mission statement of the health department, which you can read it here. I don't need to read it to you. But I wanted to bring up that just like the mission statement of our department, is that septics are one part of the conversation for responsible land use and lake health. Is in addition to a properly functioning septic system, we also, I think, need to look at impervious surfaces, responsible landscaping, responsible lawn maintenance, and a host of other factors to look at protecting our lake health in the area. So there are a multitude of additional resources if you are interested into diving into the codes and regulations surrounding the septic world. So we have our district sanitary code for the health department of Northwest Michigan, and that serves Antrim, Charlevoix, Emmett, and Otsego counties. That is available on our website at nwhealth.org. And then I know there are some members here from Sheboygan, which is District Health Department number 4. So you can go to your health department website and look at that code. And I know there has been a lot of talk about how Michigan is the last state that does not have a statewide septic code. And that's true for residential use. For residential use, it is jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But there is a statewide commercial code. That statewide commercial code is called the Michigan Criteria for Subsurface Sewage Treatment and Disposal. And you can find it online And that is what we use for any commercial application. In addition, there is more information about on-site wastewater from EGLE, as well as the EPA. I included this graphic. It is from the EPA. They do have a whole SepticSmart series, and I thought it had some good information as like a flyer of what you can do to help maintain your septic system. And with that, does anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Casey. Appreciate that. And so I will remind people, you can either put questions in the chat or use or raise the hand feature down below. We do have a question,
Okay.
a couple of them. Is there a trend towards shared septic systems in small neighborhoods? And if you're seeing that, is it a good idea?
Okay, that is not going to be a short answer, but I will try to jump into that. So once we get into the world of septic permitting, there are lots of different directions that can go. Is our department tries to work with the homeowner to see what makes most sense for them. On some of these tiny lots, maybe you can't get a drain field to fit. So we have the option of what's called a offsite drain field. As long as you can legally connect point A and point B, you can pump to a drain field located offsite. And then our department always recommends checking that offsite drain field location to make sure it's suitable with our code before easement creation or property purchase. So private offsite drain fields are one thing. You can also do a shared drain field. But when we get into sharing drain fields, either with just two homeowners or multiple homeowners, it is something that is permittable, but it does become what's called a community wastewater system. So it's a joint permit between our department and the state of Michigan underneath a Part 41 permit. But there are definitely areas that are troublesome for on-site wastewater just due to site conditions. And it would be great if homeowners could get together and try to put in their own community system in an area that's suitable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do transfer inspections apply to all transfers or only those between non-related individuals?
So for those time of transfers, I would have to look up the ordinance, each of the ordinances to see what the exemptions are. I know for Milton Township, you can transfer it from a spouse to another spouse without going through the transfer. But if it is to an unrelated party or somebody other than a spouse, I believe it does have to have an inspection. For Milton Township, the Village of Elk Rapids, and I believe Torch Lake Township too, septic systems have to be inspected if they have not been installed within the past 10 years or evaluated within the past 5 years.
Thank you. So someone is looking for a comment regarding the fact that a neighbor put some type of copper or other chemicals into their septic field to kill the tree roots that might be growing in the field.
Yeah, so there is a product called copper sulfate. And there are some installers that will sprinkle the powder on the drain field when they install it. Some installers recommend flushing it down a couple times a year to help kind of stop those roots from growing into your field. I can't really comment on it one way or the other. If you want to do it, great. But it might not be a bad idea, but I can't tell you to do it.
Can you discuss the benefit of having a filter between the septic tank and drain field?
Yes. So There's something called a effluent filter. And the function of that filter is it goes into the outlet baffle of your septic tank. The function of that filter is to catch any suspended solids before it goes out to your field. So there's an effluent filter that looks like a bottle brush, a giant bottle brush, and another one that looks like kind of a plastic slotted screen. So that will catch any suspended solids before it goes out to your field. Our department required them in 2007, but we took that requirement out in 2017 under our code revision, where now it is recommended but not required. And then just those filters are a component that do require maintenance. Their function is to catch suspended solids, and over time they will do their job and potentially plug up with suspended solids. So if they plug up with solids, that means liquid can't go out to your field. So liquid could back up into your home or come out of the top of the septic tank. So if you have a filter, just clean it out every once in a while for your peace of mind.
Thank you. So what are the recommendations for appropriate plantings over septic drain fields? Would it be native plants? Would it be a no-mow lawn? What is best for on top of a drain field?
Either one of those would be acceptable. So our department doesn't really have any hard or fast guidelines other than we just recommend trees within 10 to 20 feet away. The state of Michigan and I believe the EPA do have handouts about some septic safe plantings, and I would look at their websites for more information. And I know MSU Extension does have a good kind of Q&A about native plants over septics.
Great, thank you. Does the statewide commercial code cover Airbnbs?
It does not. So that statewide commercial code was adopted in 1994. So when we work with it, a lot of commercial applications have changed and kind of evolved since 1994. So that is kind of one of the gray areas right now that we are seeing.
We do have a follow-up on the copper sulfate. Does the copper sulfate bioaccumulate, and does it find a way to make it into our surface water, our lakes and streams?
I can't answer either of those questions. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay. Maybe the Watershed Council will try and figure that out.
Okay. If you do, let me know.
Okay. And as for right now, that is the last question I see.
Okay. So then I don't know if I'm still sharing my screen.
You are not.
Okay. So the last slide I had, you're welcome to share it, is my contact information if anyone has any additional questions.
Okay. We can make sure in a follow-up email, we will share your contact information with everyone.
Okay.
Thank you again. And Lauren, I will turn it back to you.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, our next presentation is going to be from Jennifer McKay. She will be talking about policy efforts at the state level. Jennifer McKay joined TIP of the Mitt Watershed Council in May of 2005. As Chief Policy and Government Affairs Director, Jennifer leads the development, execution, and evaluation of the organization's policy work to improve water resources protection and serves to ensure that priority positions and local, state, and national advocacy outcomes are effectively achieved. Thanks for joining us, Jennifer. And go ahead and share your screen when you're ready.
All right, thank you. Okay. So I will be discussing the fact that Michigan, as it was mentioned, does not have a statewide septic code, but there were some bills that were introduced. So could Michigan become the 50th state to actually get a septic code? So basically, in Michigan, we have 35% of residents that rely on septic systems. That means that there are between 1.3 and 1.4 million on-site septic systems throughout the state. And each of those generates an average of 300 to 400 gallons of sewage daily. So that means in Michigan, we have on-site systems that must treat and dispose of more than 455 million gallons of wastewater each day. In northern Michigan, many of us rely on septic systems for wastewater treatment. But if you look at the map that shows the density of septic systems, the density is not actually concentrated here in northern Michigan. As I mentioned, Michigan is the only state in the nation without uniform standards for how septic systems are designed, built, installed, and maintained. Michigan has local septic codes created by the local district health departments in conjunction with township and county governments. But these codes typically only regulate the installation or the failure of septic systems. So as a result, most on-site septic systems are never inspected once they're installed. Public health officials in Michigan believe that reported septic system failures represent only a fraction of the total number of failures statewide, and many go undetected or remain unreported for years. Michigan State University studies suggest that at least 1/3 of septic systems are not working properly, and the state of Michigan estimates that there are more than 330,000 failing septic systems. So lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have repeatedly tried and failed to end Michigan's reign as the only state lacking comprehensive regulations to prevent septic systems from polluting our waters. As it was noted in the intro, Michigan's been debating the solution to septic systems for more than 20 years, longer than I've been at the Watershed Council, and longer than the average septic system lasts. As with other tries, the most previous attempts to pass the septic code failed. Last year, legislation died at the end of session. However, last year, the bill would have required inspections when property changed hands. So it would have been a statewide point of sale inspection, which was adamantly opposed by Michigan realtors. And in 2018, there was also an attempt to pass a bill that would have required periodic inspections. That bill met the same fate, dying at the end of session. But this time it was, in fact, the environmental community, among others, that came to oppose our own bill due to the fact that it became so watered down and provided little protection. And it also failed to provide the necessary funding. So, but that being said, we don't give up. So in honor of Earth Day, State Representative Phil Skaggs and Senate Majority Floor Leader Sam Singh announced that they were going to create a statewide septic code to help protect water quality across the state. So you'll hear from Anna McGlashan next about local ordinances. And while we've had many successes with local ordinances here in northern Michigan, the majority of the state remains unregulated. And so with no statutory way to define or alleviate failing septic systems in much of the state, we have systems that have led to contaminated waters, leading to increased levels of E. coli, other bacteria and algae blooms. We've seen closures of lakes and beaches. So the bills that were introduced will establish state standards for septic systems, also known as on-site wastewater treatment systems, and require inspections of those systems, and establish a technical advisory commission within EGLE to advise the department, legislature, and local health departments on the most current scientific standards for septic tanks. So there's dual bills, both introduced in the House and the Senate. So the first, sorry. So the first bill, House Bill 4497, which is also Senate Bill 299, would amend the Public Health Code to define on-site systems, specifies what the duties of the local health department would be, which essentially would be to administer the program if they are approved and want to, require periodic inspections, establishes a database on those inspections that will go to the counties and to EGLE. So we'll have a much better understanding of where some of the most problematic areas are. It also establishes a inspector certification program to ensure all inspectors go through the same program and have the same qualifications. And it also would require counties to phase out or repeal any current time of transfer inspection ordinances they have within 1 year after EGLE issues rules. And EGLE is required to promulgate rules within 3 years after the ordinance passes. So as far as the periodic inspections go, they can be conducted either by the approved local health departments or EGLE. New systems that are installed must have an inspection 10 years after installation, and after that, once every 5 years. All other systems have to be inspected every 5 years. I apologize. If a septic system was inspected under a local ordinance, then the next inspection must occur within 5 years from the date of the inspection. In addition, there are other events that could trigger an inspection. So if a complaint is filed by a citizen, if the health department has reasonable cause to require an inspection, so if they believe there is a failure, if there is a change in use that increases use of the septic system, and similarly, if there's an application for a building permit that, you know, there's construction or addition of a structure, or once again, change in use that changes the capacity use of the septic system. So once the inspection is done, within 60 days, you'll get a report. It will not only contain the results of the inspection, but also recommendations to extend the life of the system and prevent premature failure. If the report says the tank has to be pumped, then the homeowner will be required to pump the tank within 30 days. If the report says that the tank is in failure, then the homeowner has 6 months to address that failure. There is a provision that does allow the homeowner to work with the local health department or EGLE on timing. So if, you know, for whatever reason, they can't do it in 6 months, there is a bit leeway to work with them. If you're unable to fix the failure and do not work with the agencies, the fine is $1,000 for each 30-day period that the system remains in failure. So what's the definition of a failure? These are not all the provisions that indicate a failure, but essentially it's when a drain field has been hydraulically saturated, or when the effluent is exposed to the surface of the ground, or backing up into the home or structure, or where it's draining into any lake, river, storm sewer, or stream, where the seepage of effluent is endangering public or private water supply, or already has contaminated a well, where an imminent danger is created because the system wasn't properly constructed or maintained. And of course, if a home or facility is supposed to have a septic system and does not, that represents a failure, as does illicit connections and discharges. And any discharge that does not comply with water quality standards is a failure. So there's a companion bill that goes along with it. It is House Bill 4480. Again, it's also in the Senate, Senate Bill 300. So this bill creates a technical advisory committee. It's a 17-member committee where there will be 5 regional health department representatives, professional engineer, hydrogeologist, microbiologist, septic manufacturer, septic service provider, epidemiologist, representative of users of septic systems. So this could be like a lake association representative or homeowner association representative, water protection organization, and a drain commissioner, either current or former. The members are appointed by the governor to serve a 4-year term. They will advise EGLE as it develops its rules, covering septic system design, siting, maintenance, and inspections. And EGLE will again promulgate those rules 3 years after passage of the bill. And the advisory committee is to make recommendations about the standards, the technologies, and qualifications of people who inspect on-site systems. And EGLE cannot promulgate the rules without first consulting with the technical advisory committee. In addition, this bill also creates an on-site fund to cover administrative costs, to provide grants to local health departments who administer the program, and to provide grants or loans to low-income homeowners who need to replace on-site systems. And so that assistance for low-income homeowners is applicable for those who are below 400% of the federal poverty line. And just to give you an indication, here is what is currently the federal poverty line level for 400%. So if you're a household of 2, you know, annual income $78,880. And you can see, you know, as you go up and increase in the household size. So some of the key issues that are still need to be debated are the fact that this would result in approximately 280,000 septic inspections annually. And that would result in staffing issues, whether it's local health departments or EGLE. Currently, neither are adequately staffed to implement the program. And in order to implement the program adequately, they would need funding. So appropriations would be needed for administration by either the health department or EGLE. There is in the bill the ability to charge, obviously, fees for the inspections, but that certainly wouldn't cover the entire cost of implementing the program. And then again, assistance for low-income homeowners. Currently, there is $35 million that was provided through the Michigan Clean Water Plan for low-interest loans. But that's literally a drop in the bucket compared to what is needed. Again, if you look at how many failing septic tanks there are, 330,000. Even if costs were relatively low to repair each one, you know, it's across the state, you're looking at $3.3 billion to repair everything. Now, not everyone needs assistance, but 35 million is not going to be enough money. So, and then the last issue is those properties that require more stringent requirements. So there are some properties such as short-term rentals that need to be likely evaluated more often than every 5 years due to the fact of capacity and how much they're used. And those are not addressed in these bills. So the next steps, we're still continuing to refine the language. So everything I just told you that's in the bill is subject to change.
Jennifer?
Yes?
I
can start downstairs.
No, that's fine. I'm on a...
You know, everything I said is, very subject to change. We were hoping for a hearing as soon as the legislature returned this fall. The hearing would be in the House Natural Resources Environment Committee, but that did not happen. So there are a couple of things happening in Lansing that could derail the process. First is there are other priorities that have distracted lawmakers. Reproductive rights and climate and energy are taking center stage at the Capitol. And, you know, I'm not going to debate whether those policies are of greater significance to the residents, to the future of Michigan. But I will state, you know, those efforts have taken focus away from other key priorities such as septics. So my call to action for all of you is to contact Representative Skaggs as well as your representative and let them know that septics, the statewide septic code is a priority for you and the state of Michigan. And we would like to see it move and get a hearing very soon. Representative Skaggs' contact information is up on the screen. In addition to other priorities, we might have a shortened time frame upon which we can work, and we could potentially come to a deadlock in the House. So we have two Democratic state representatives that are running for local mayor offices, and if they win in November, the House would be split 54-54. This would make it extremely difficult to get anything passed, as there'd be no majority. In addition, due to the presidential primary, there's some talk about adjourning in November. And so these factors could prove to be obstacles to getting passage of the statewide septic bills this session. So again, I urge you all to contact Representative Skaggs and your local elected official to see if we can try and get this bill moving. And with that, thank you. And I will stop sharing and take questions.
All right, thank you so much, Jennifer. We do have a couple questions in the chat. The first one is referring to the map that you showed at the beginning of your presentation. Is the low density of septics in and around tip of the Mitt area more a function of low population rather than low reliance on septic systems in and around our area?
I would say yes. We definitely do have a high reliance on septic systems, but our population is significantly lower than those of Macomb and Washtenaw counties.
Okay. I think you touched on this, but do the bills provide a source of low interest financing for system replacement?
So there is a fund that is to provide money for low interest or for low income individuals. It's just we would have to go to appropriations and get a chunk of money. But right now we have a surplus of money given, everything that the federal government has. And so now is the perfect time to try and go for the funding and to fill that fund.
Thank you. How can we get an outline of the provisions in the bill that you are describing?
I can put a link to where you can get the bills in the chat. Or we can share the presentations.
Okay. Yep, we will be sharing this presentation will be recorded and we'll share it out. And if there's any other follow-up links, we can share that information as well. Okay, about how much is a septic inspection and who would pay for it?
So the septic inspections would be, homeowners would have to pay for those. And the price is generally around $250, $300.
If a short-term rental is considered a commercial entity in a township by zoning ordinance, would the commercial septic code be applicable versus residential?
So as Casey mentioned, we're still trying to figure that out. Basically, these bills would not allow local units of government to regulate septic systems in any way. And so that's the problem, is all authority would be taken away from local government for regulating septic systems.
Thank you. And there's a comment in here followed by a question. I'm aware that there are technology improvements in septic systems, but our local contractors are not even aware of them. Should there be efforts to offer or introduce nitrogen removal systems or other in our area?
Casey's still around.
We can follow up with her too and ask that question. So
yeah, there are alternative systems that are definitely used and being considered in the bills. They do allow for alternative and proprietary, non-proprietary systems under certain circumstances, as a means to, ensure that we have the best protection possible.
Thank you. Do you have a sense of how our bill compares to other states?
So, other states do it differently. You know, some states require inspections every 3 years. Some states just require pumping every 5 years. You know, it depends on the states, but I think it would be at least an improvement to get the inspection, and that would require pumping if necessary, and address failures.
Okay. Right now, that's all the questions I see in the chat, but I also want to remind people that you have the opportunity to ask your question in person. If you would like to take yourselves off mute, just let us know. The raise my hand feature is down on the reactions tab. So if you want to raise your hand to ask your question in person, you can do that as well. Are there any other questions for Jennifer? Okay. All right. Well, as I mentioned, we can always follow up with our staff through our website as well. So thank you very much for that presentation, Jennifer. All right. Moving on to our next presentation. We're going to hear from Anna McGlashan on local policy options for septic systems. Anna McGlashan joined the tip of the Mitt Watershed Council this May after completing a master's degree in environmental policy from the University of Michigan. As local policy manager, Anna helps to set priorities for addressing water quality issues, reviews permit applications, and supports local governments and organizations. Over to you, Anna.
Okay. All right, so my name is Anna McGlashan, and I'm going to be talking about options for local policy. I'm aware that this is looking at local policy from the Lake Association perspective. So neither we nor lake associations have the regulatory authority to implement these policies, but we wanted to make sure that you knew the suite of policy options that are available. So taking a step back, non-point source pollution is the leading remaining cause of water quality problems. But as Casey mentioned, these pollutants are coming from a number of sources. And so as we think about lake and water health, it's important to address all of these questions of shoreline development and stream bank erosion and agricultural activities. So this is one piece of the puzzle, and even of that, septic regulations are a piece of the puzzle of solving septic system failures. But as septic systems fail, they are introducing pollutants into waters. So back in 2015, Michigan State looked at 64 rivers in lower Michigan, and they determined that, or the results suggest that human fecal contamination was affecting 100% of the studied watersheds. So not necessarily that all watersheds are impacted, but that all of the watersheds that they looked at had human fecal contamination. And putting those pieces together, bacterial concentrations were highest where there were higher numbers of septic systems in that watershed area. And this problem is pervasive. So EGLE has previously stated that 9,000 miles of Michigan streams were contaminated with E. coli, and that number is expected to grow. Nearly half of Michigan's total stream mileage is expected to be contaminated with E. coli. And to be fair, it may be non-human E. coli, but the fact remains that there is evidence that there is some type of problem. So when we look at policy options to consider, the first one is maintain the status quo. Don't do anything. Use the existing infrastructure that is already in place through the district sanitary codes to ensure that septic systems do not impact water quality, using a periodic either pumping or inspection ordinance, or using a time of transfer ordinance so a ordinance associated with the sale or transfer of a home, or a more targeted approach through septic system provisions on short-term rentals, or finally, stepping away from septic systems altogether and transitioning to a sewer system. So maintaining the status quo requires the least lift. There would be no change in current oversight or policy processes. Septic systems that are potentially failing could cause increased health concerns and environmental impacts. However, many systems will be properly maintained and updated over time. The concern with maintaining the status quo is as older systems go uninspected and unmaintained, they may eventually fail. So part of the rationale for implementing a septic ordinance would be to catch those systems as they age. Then there's a mandatory pumping ordinance. This would be to prevent septic system failures by periodically requiring the pumping. As Casey mentioned earlier, it is a little bit difficult to say this is a specific time frame every 5 years that applies to every system. It's going to depend on the size of your system and the use of that system. But the idea would be if your system is being pumped regularly, it is less likely to fail. That system will last longer. Some mandatory pumping ordinances do require inspection as well. Others require proof of pumping within specified time periods. One note here is that it would require collaborating with local septic haulers. If you suddenly implement a pumping ordinance and there's only one company in the area that provides that service, they may not be able to immediately adjust to that increased demand. Then a mandatory inspection ordinance. So that would be something where every 5 years or every period of time, an inspection of the tank would need to be conducted. That is typically overseen or conducted by the health department, although it can be done by a third-party contractor, such as in the current state bill, which is designed to establish a certification system for new inspectors. The homeowner would only be required to do what is appropriate for their specific system to bring it up to code or to address problems. So the idea is, unlike a pumping ordinance, which is associated with that particular activity, the inspection ordinance is designed to provide recommendations to extend the life of the system. And then if repairs are needed, there's usually some agreed upon time frame to implement those required changes. Then there's a time of transfer ordinance. This is the option that has been most common in northern Michigan. It is a targeted approach that reduces the administrative burden of the program. Because it is associated with the time of the sale, that is the trigger for action, which removes the responsibility of maintaining a database from the local government or from the health department. The inspections are conducted at the time of the sale or the transfer, or if the ground is frozen, it is possible that that inspection may actually take place at a later date that is agreed upon by the home buyer and the health department. And what this does is it doesn't only require the inspection of the tank itself, but it also provides an educational opportunity for new homeowners. If you are living on a septic system for the first time, or if you're not aware that this new house that you're buying has a septic system, it is possible that you wouldn't know how to properly maintain it, including preventing flushing of items that are inappropriate or regularly pumping. It's going to help new homeowners understand where their drain field is and how to properly prevent the impediment of the proper functioning of that drain field. So not only is this addressing the system itself, but it is also addressing that education piece. One of the potential downsides of a time of transfer ordinance is If a house stays within a family for a long period of time, it can be decades before that system is inspected. Or if a ordinance does not specifically address within family transfers, a home can pass between family members and never be inspected. So the moving away from a general ordinance that would apply to all homeowners, a short-term rental ordinance is an option that is going to address priority parcels. So those are houses that are more likely to have an increased burden on the septic system that it was not designed to handle, or waterfront parcels that if there's a failure on that parcel, it is more likely to impact water quality. So a short-term rental regulation may limit the number of guests based on septic tank size and the number of bedrooms. One of the concerns would be if you have a waterfront cottage that was designed to have a maximum capacity of 2 to 4 people, if you have a large group coming in to use that system, or many large groups coming in to use that system, it can overwhelm the system and lead to premature failure. Or a short-term rental regulation may also require the homeowner to have a current inspection on file. So that's ensuring that before this home is open for the public, that system is up to date. And given that short-term rentals are often on waterfront properties, this is an opportunity to have that strategic first step of making sure that water resources are protected. Then, moving away from septics altogether, it is possible to shift to sewers. So these are typically established through a special assessment district, and the process can be initiated by either property owners or lake associations or by local governments. I will note, however, that there are strict procedural requirements. And I will also say that the Watershed Council does not have a board-approved policy on the use of septic systems versus sewer systems. If asked for our opinion, we will provide it on a case-by-case basis, but we do not have a board-approved policy, but we would be happy to provide recommendations if that, or at least take a look at proposals if that is a question that comes to us. So those are some different policy options for addressing septic failures. But I want to also take a step to the side and say it is incredibly important to coordinate with stakeholders, including the local health department, inspectors, local governments, and septic haulers. Passing an ordinance is not the end of the game. Everyone involved must have the capacity to actually implement the required inspections and pumping. Otherwise, it will not be a successful program. Local governments should have these conversations early on to ensure that the ordinance is practical, effective, and enforceable. And although lake associations do not have the enforcement authority, one role that you can have is raising concerns and elevating these issues to help get local governments on board and let them know that there are policy options that can help address these issues. So, as building off of what Jennifer McKay said, the state has been working on this for decades, but we still do not have a statewide system for residential septic systems. And local governments have the capacity to fill that gap and address this in a timely manner. Even if the statewide septic code does not, even if it passes this fall, it is still going to be at least 3 years for that to be implemented. So this is a way to, with relative speed, move forward on this issue, and local ordinances are one way of addressing this. It is true that education and outreach are going to be helpful in terms of bringing homeowners on board and ensuring that everyone knows what a septic system is and how to properly maintain it. Ordinances are a potential part of the solution to this problem. And Torch Lake Township. So Torch Lake Township is a potential model for ordinances moving forward. It is a time of transfer ordinance, so there are ongoing inspections associated with the sale of homes in the township, but it has been coupled with baseline inspections, which are being applied to waterfront properties, so properties within 500 feet of a lake, and properties without a septic permit on file. We have also removed exemptions for in-family transfers. So what that means is there's this model in place, both in terms of provisions and in terms of specific language that other townships can implement, to start passing local ordinances that will have a relatively immediate impact. I will say, just to beat this drum again, that while Torch Lake Township's ordinance did come online earlier this month, there is a lot of work left to be done. There's background work in identifying parcels and managing the implementation of these programs. And so while passing an ordinance is faster than waiting for the state, maybe faster than waiting for the state, it is also important to understand that once that ordinance is passed, it is just the beginning of the lift. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions now, or feel free to send me an email.
Thank you, Anna. So once again, I'll remind people you can put questions in the chat or use the raise your hand feature. How do we ensure that ordinances really have the requirements to catch septic systems that are not performing? I understand that under Milton Township's title transfer ordinance, the health department reported they have inspected 500 systems over the last decade and only required 2 systems to make repairs.
So I will say that there are many systems that had violations that did not have required changes, but there were many recommendations that were not required that did extend the life of those systems or improved the performance of those systems. So it is not just the systems that have required activities, it is also all of the education that happened to inform home buyers. It is also the recommended actions that will help extend the life of those systems and prevent failures. So ensuring that the ordinances really have the requirements to catch systems that are not performing. We do not currently have a robust system to remotely identify failing systems. And in that case, a periodic inspection or a time of transfer inspection is going to be a way of catching more systems that are failing. It is going to help. Jennifer, you want to add anything?
No, I think you covered it. I think the only other thing would be Milton Township did do a survey of home buyers and that were under the process, and it overwhelmingly were in support of the time of transfer ordinance because, as Anna acknowledged, it did provide them with the information they needed on their septic and well. So it is providing them vital information that they wouldn't have otherwise. At this point in time, you did good because there are no more questions. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Anna. Our final presentation today, we're going to be hearing from Marcella Domke on the Lake Charlevoix septic system case study. Marcella joined the Watershed Council in May of 2023 after receiving her master's in fisheries and wildlife from Michigan State University. As Water Resources Manager, Marcella works with lake associations and other local organizations to determine survey and study needs as they relate to water quality monitoring, shoreline restoration, and invasive species. She also oversees the Watershed Council volunteer lake and stream monitoring programs and comprehensive water quality monitoring efforts. Take it away, Marcella.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, is everything looking good, Lauren?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Perfect. All right, good morning, as Lauren said, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm Marcella Domke. I'm the Water Resources Manager here at Tip of the Mitt, and I will go ahead and discuss with you the results of our Lake Charlevoix septic case study. Okay, so before I get into the meat of the presentation, I just wanted to offer some acknowledgements for funding and the idea of this project as well. So funding to conduct this study came from the Charlevoix County Community Foundation as well as the Lake Charlevoix Association. So we're very appreciative of their contributions that allowed this project to happen. We would also like to note that Lake Charlevoix Association developed the idea for this septic study, and they were very proactive about ensuring the execution of water monitoring and data collection on their lake. Additionally, we would like to thank Central Michigan University, as well as the Health Department of Northwest Michigan for analyzing different samples and for offering aquatic nutrient expertise. So getting right into our study area for this case study, we were looking at the Lake Charlevoix watershed, which has a surface area of 17,200 acres and a shoreline length of 60 miles. It is the third largest inland lake in Michigan, and its watershed collects from 214,000 acres within northern Michigan. In terms of land cover and land use, the land cover is predominantly forest. Over about 50% of the watershed is a forest biome. And then the deepest area of Lake Charlevoix reaches about 122 feet. So that's just to provide some context for this study area that we looked at. So jumping right into the methodology, we had two components to this overall study. So we had a septic survey as well as data collection that took place in the field. So I wanted to cover the septic survey and how we conducted that right off the bat. So the way that we went about this survey is we sent about 500 letters announcing the septic survey itself to Lake Charlevoix property owners, which was done using the Lake Association mailing list. We had about a 15% response rate received from the 500 letters we sent out. And we had a variety of different topics included on that survey to really gauge understanding of septic conditions, as well as aquatic plants, erosion, etc. So different topics included shoreline structure, erosion, aquatic plants, filamentous algae, as well as septic tank pumping, age, and even the composition of the tank, such as the materials it consisted of. So different types of questions that one saw on the survey included things like what best describes your lakefront type, and some options for this would be natural, sand beach, a steel seawall, etc. We also asked questions such as, does filamentous algae, such as Cladophora, which I'll explain a bit more later in these slides, does that ever grow in the shallow water of your lakefront? We also asked homeowners if they fertilized their lawn, and if so, what NPK formula they used. And then finally, lots of septic tank questions, such as how old is your septic tank? How often do you pump it? And what materials does it consist of? So for the methodology of the field data, and I will get into all the septic survey results when we get into that portion of the presentation. But for the field data, we identified priority parcels along Lake Charlevoix. Since the shoreline is about 60 miles, we had to narrow the study area to make it a workable, feasible project. So to identify these priority parcels, we based the priority on 3 different criteria. The first was Cladophora, which I just mentioned is a filamentous algae that blooms in response to excess nutrients, and it can be used as an indicator of eutrophication in a lake. So we looked at areas where Cladophora was identified as heavy or very heavy. And the way we kind of determined those categories was based on percentage of coverage. So like very light would be, 0 to 5% coverage, and then very heavy would be, I think, 90 to 100% coverage. The second criteria that we used were health department priority areas. So areas that were considered by the health department to be high risk or high risk for pollution or eutrophication, as well as local knowledge. So we did consult with lake associations and homeowners to kind of understand what areas were in need of monitoring. It should be noted that even though we use these 3 criteria, this isn't representative of total lake conditions in Lake Charlevoix, as again, we had that really long stretch of shoreline that we're not able to monitor the many parcels that Lake Charlevoix has. So that's just something to keep in mind. So of the 984 total priority parcels that were identified, we ended up surveying 431 for conductivity, so about 44%. Conductivity, for those of you that don't know, is the ability of water to conduct an electrical current. So we measured conductivity as well as basic aquatic parameters with a probe, such as temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH or acidity, and the depth. And then if we got conductivity readings that were greater than about 300 microsiemens per centimeter, which is above Lake Charlevoix ambient levels based on our previous data collection, using some of our programs here at the Watershed Council. If we had readings above that, that would trigger the collection of nutrients, which I will talk about what nutrients we collected in just a bit. And then in addition to those basic aquatic parameters, we had on-site sampling collection for several different additional parameters. So those included soil conductivity. That was conducted using a Terramar soil instrument, which looked at 2 parameters, those parameters being basic soil conductivity and then sensitivity to buried metal. So that could include the septic tank if it were underground, and then any septic leachate that was occurring from the tank itself. Surface water conductivity, any surface water measurements were done at mid-depth, which we defined as 6 to 10 inches below the surface of the water, since these were shoreline samples. Groundwater conductivity, surface water nutrients, as well as E. coli. E. coli, as I'm sure you understand from these previous presentations, is an indicator of fecal contamination, which tells us that a septic system issue may occur nearby. And those E. coli locations where we sampled were determined based on the same parameters used for identification of priority parcels. We also looked at groundwater nutrients in E. coli. It's not coming up. There we go. And what should be noted here is that we typically would like to conduct qPCR, or qualitative polymerase chain reaction analysis, for our E. coli samples. That is an indicator of whether the E. coli is from a human or animal source. So human would obviously indicate a septic issue, and then an animal source could just be naturally occurring in the lake from geese or other organisms. So it should be noted that we could not complete this sampling for this project as the lab did not have the capacity to take our samples at the time this project was carried out, and then budgetary restrictions as well. So I'm going ahead and I'm going to dive right into the results here. I'll only be covering results for parameters that had abnormal readings. So our surface water and groundwater conductivity readings were all normal. They fell within recommended ranges from both the EPA and we used criteria from the Huron River Watershed Council. So looking at our Cladophora results, we saw that 76.3% of parcels surveyed showed no signs of Cladophora growth. So that would indicate in 76% of these parcels, there was no indication of excessive nutrients, which can be caused by septic tank issues. And additionally, less than 1% of those shoreline properties that we surveyed were classified as very heavy Cladophora density. So that's a pretty low number. In terms of our surface water E. coli monitoring, we saw that 73.3% of parcels surveyed did have E. coli bacteria present. And I will get into the groundwater results and what those mean as well. So for groundwater E. coli, it was interesting that we saw kind of a contrast between groundwater and surface water. 61.1% of parcels did not have E. coli present in our groundwater samples, as you can see on these wonderful maps that one of our resource specialists made for us here. And 11.2% of those parcels, however, that were monitored for groundwater E. coli did have high or very high levels of E. coli. So if you can see on the map to the right here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the very high and high levels are kind of under this layer of dots over here. So we did have a couple readings that were concerning. For nutrient monitoring, our results, well, the nutrients that we sampled consisted of total phosphorus and total nitrogen, both of which are normal in aquatic ecosystems, but in excess can cause eutrophication and harmful algae blooms. So for nitrogen, we had some surprising results here in that all the samples that we collected for nitrogen were above the recommended threshold, indicating nutrient pollution in the form of nitrogen. And then with phosphorus, 76% of those samples were below the recommended threshold, which was encouraging. So our results were indicative that we did have these heavy nitrogen concentrations in the lake, but not as heavy phosphorus pollution. And it is important to note, and it's interesting as well, that many samples with elevated total nitrogen and total phosphorus concentrations were from groundwater samples. Getting into our results for soil conductivity, we had a very wide range of soil conductivity values using that TerraMar instrument that I mentioned earlier. These values, as you can see on the right, range from almost 3,300 microsiemens per meter to 2,200, I'm sorry, millisiemens per meter. So I'll explain more about what that conductivity range means when I get into the discussion, but for now, just know that that range was pretty wide for our data collection. So getting into the results of the septic survey, we found that based on asking homeowners about the age of their septic tanks and systems, that these septic systems ranged from 0 to 5 years old. So 37% of owners had a tank that was 0 to 5 years old, all the way to 35 plus years old. We also found from the survey that many systems had issues such as root infiltration, a replacement part was needed, pumping was needed, or in some cases, even a whole new septic system was needed. In terms of how often residents pumped their tanks, 40% of property owners, which was a really encouraging number, pumped their septic tanks within the recommended number of years, which is every 3 to 5. However, pump times did range from never pumped, about 6% of homeowners, to every 10 or more years, which was 3%. And additionally, over 20% of property owners had no knowledge of how often their septic tank was pumped. So that does indicate that maybe tanks were not being pumped within the correct number of years. So getting into a discussion of these septic survey results, we see that while there is an encouraging portion of homeowners that are practicing proper septic maintenance, there is also a large portion that are failing to follow the recommendations for pumping and inspections. Failure to follow these recommendations does have a plethora of issues here. It can be costly to the owner. It provides many environmental issues such as groundwater contamination, human pathogen exposure through E. coli bacteria, and nutrient influx to ecosystems, which can disrupt aquatic food webs and ecosystems through cultural eutrophication and lack of oxygen. As Casey mentioned, and I'm sure Jennifer and Anna did too, there were many property owners that stated that their septic tanks were accompanied by a drain field. That's the main second component of a septic tank system. And many drain fields within 300 feet of a lake or stream are known to contribute pollutants to the water. So that was something that was important to note here. And as Casey mentioned, with these drain fields, it is important to keep livestock, cars, or plant roots and trees away from these drain fields. So that could be another possible issue or another possible reason why homeowners were experiencing different issues with their septic tanks, is perhaps improper drain field maintenance. So getting into our discussion of the cladophora results, if you remember what I said earlier, we did see 76.3% of parcels with no cladophora growth. So what we did is we compared these survey results to a 2018 shoreline survey that was conducted by a tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. And we saw that there was a decline in general cladophora growth compared to this survey. There are a couple of reasons that this decline may have occurred. After sending out recommendations for septic care in the 2018 shoreline survey, the cladophora may have decreased due to the results of that survey and homeowners taking better care of their septic systems, which would result in less leaking and less infiltration of nutrients into our into Lake Charlevoix. Additionally, I don't want to talk about that quite yet. There are some confounding variables that may have accounted for the general growth decline. These include invasive species such as mussels that affect water clarity, water composition, and feed on algae. And then mitigation of fertilizers in runoff. So if we had less fertilizer or less runoff entering Lake Charlevoix, that could have been a reason that we saw this decline in growth. It also should be noted that exact parcels from the 2018 survey and the 2022 Lake Charlevoix septic study were not compared directly, but rather general percentages of cladophora. So that's where we saw that decline. So all of this doesn't necessarily mean that there's no septic contamination occurring just because cladophora growth declined. It is just a possible explanation that maybe septic maintenance did improve based on the results of that 2018 survey. So getting into our discussion of the E. coli results, we saw that 73.3% of surface water samples had fecal contamination, so a much higher percentage than groundwater. So we know that septic effluent can contain significant amounts of E. coli, as that is where waste is disposed of. It can contaminate water bodies if the tank or drain field soil is not treating the wastewater properly. And then I did find in an interesting resource that during the summer months or during warmer temperatures, the growth of bacteria within tanks is facilitated as bacteria like warm temperatures. So if there is a septic problem, you may have a proliferation of that bacteria and then more of it is entering the waterway. Based on all this, however, it is important to note that even though we did have 73% of parcels with E. coli contamination, Only 2 of these samples were above the EPA recommended maximum level. It's based on a geometric mean of 30 days. And they recommend that E. coli levels are not above 100 colony forming units per 100 milliliters of water. So we did only have 2 samples that were above that recommended maximum, which is encouraging. So essentially what that means is that if septic malfunction were occurring, and E. coli was being, was contributing to lake water pollution and lake water, contamination, then it was likely only at a few select properties on Lake Charlevoix, since we had such a small number of readings. But again, it is not, excuse me about that. It's not conclusive because we were not able to, again, run that qPCR, so we don't know whether that E. coli was of animal or human source. So a discussion in terms of nutrients, we'll get into total nitrogen. So like I mentioned earlier, it was evident from our nutrient analysis that Lake Charlevoix did have nutrient pollution in the form of nitrogen-heavy waters. Conventional septic systems are not always effective in removing all nitrogen species from wastewater. So in addition to total nitrogen, there is nitrate in septic effluent that septic tanks or systems may not be completely effective at removing all those different forms of nitrogen. When this nitrogen is not removed, and if there are septic leaching issues or septic malfunction, you end up with cultural eutrophication and decreased water quality, unsafe drinking water, and threats to human health and aquatic ecosystem stability. So for our soil conductivity results, as I mentioned, we use that Terramar instrument to measure sensitivity to buried metal, as well as basic soil conductivity values. So what am I trying to say? The criteria that we used here to determine saline versus non-saline soils is that we found that readings above 1,600 millisiemens per meter were indicative of very salty saline soils, meaning they were highly conductive and had could have high chloride readings, as those two are correlated. And then readings between 0 to 200 millisiemens per meter were non-saline soils, so probably not very conductive and probably not a lot of chloride levels. So what we found, again, is that we had this really wide range of soil conductivity values. There are a couple possible reasons for this. One is that septic leachate, if there were septic malfunction occurring, that would be absorbed into surrounding soils and affecting the conductivity and the salt content. We could have varying levels of hydraulic conductivity, which is a measure of the rate that water can move through soil. We could have different levels of that impacting the drain field ability to treat septic effluent. And then finally, there are varying ecological conditions around Lake Charlevoix that could impact chloride levels, such as limestone geology. So that could be affecting soil conductivity levels. It should be noted, though, that these results, though there are a variety of explanations for why we had such a wide range, these results aren't conclusive because saline soils are not necessarily an indicator of septic malfunction. It is a possible explanation, but just because you have highly conductive soils, we cannot conclude that a septic tank is leaking just from that. So I've been saying that some things are non-conclusive and it's difficult to conclude certain things, but there are things that we can definitively conclude from our results from this survey. So what we can conclude is that improper care of septic tank systems is occurring in a portion of Lake Charlevoix properties. And many of these properties experience problems with their septic systems due to improper maintenance. So if you remember when I went over the results of what different problems homeowners experienced. Those included root infiltration, a replacement part was needed, pumping was not done often enough, and even in some cases, a new septic tank system was needed. We can also say that there is evidence of nutrient pollution and fecal contamination in select parcels, whether the fecal contamination is from a animal or human source, we cannot say without running qPCR. But we do have evidence of high nitrogen levels, and there were some high phosphorus readings, but the majority of parcels were within a normal range. So given all this, it is important to say that septic malfunction and septic tank leaking or problems, it cannot be determined without further data collection and on-site inspection from a professional. So given all this information, we wanted to think about what the next steps were and how we would kind of proceed with the information we have. So there's a lot of different steps we can take here. The first would be promoting education and outreach to homeowners and prospective buyers about septic tank systems and septic tank care. Notifying those owners of inspections and proper maintenance and how they can go about caring for those systems. Pursuing the identification of properties with no permits or outdated permits for their septic tanks through MDHHS. Implementing long-term septic monitoring through the Watershed Council to track water quality changes over time and see if we can understand septic malfunction any better from these trends that are over, several years or several decades. Pursuing additional sampling and qPCR analysis, which is what we hope to do with Lake Charlevoix Association. So resampling parcels that had high nitrogen readings, had indication of E. coli, and then with those E. coli samples, running qPCR analysis so we can understand if we do have a septic problem and we're seeing human bacteria in the lake, or if it's simply from geese or other aquatic organisms. Another thing that we could promote and look towards is adopting local ordinances and promoting the adoption of a statewide septic code, as we heard from Jennifer and Anna. And then last, well, this is not the last of all the things we can do, but of the major things, identifying potential property owners that may need funding for system replacement, and seeing if there's any assistance that can be provided for that problem. So that's all I have for you today. Thanks everyone for listening. And there are a couple links, I believe, that Kala or Lauren is going to place in the chat if anyone wants further resources, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Marcella. That was fantastic.
Thanks.
Again, questions can go in the chat, or you can use the raise your hand function. So if there's an increase in Cladophora or other algae is noticed in the stream or lakeshore with a septic failure is suspected as being the cause, how does one go about determining the source of the nutrients without causing landowner conflict?
That's a good question. So for the source of the nutrients, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming from a septic tank or a specific, landowner. That could be the case, but we would probably try to approach that by just resampling those parcels that had high nitrogen or in some cases high phosphorus levels, and kind of go from there. We don't like to, call specific landowners out or point fingers or anything. So we'd probably start just by resampling those areas and see, again, if we get those high nitrogen readings, and then we can also observe Cladophora growth, just that's based on the human eye, what kind of percentage of coverage we see. So it would be more of an observational basis. And then if a landowner needed to be contacted, that would probably be done in a more private manner, just because we wouldn't want to point fingers for anyone having excessive nutrients from their property.
Great, thanks. So I think you answered all these, but what total nitrogen, total phosphorus recommended levels were used, and then what was a high E. coli concentration defined as?
Yeah, so the thresholds for total nitrogen and total phosphorus we used from Central Michigan University. These levels were backed by years of scientific literature, peer-reviewed data. So we said anything higher than 0.03 milligrams per liter was indicative of nutrient pollution, both in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus. And then for E. coli, anything above the EPA recommended maximum was concerning. So that was 100 colony forming units of the bacteria per 100 milliliters of water. And that is based on a 30-day geometric mean. So it requires some calculations and finding that average, but that's how it's typically calculated.
Thank you. Are you able to differentiate between the sources of phosphorus and nitrogen in the watershed? So septics, agricultural,
right,
others.
That would probably require more of like a broad scale analysis so we could see where different, inputs are coming from, but it just by testing those levels in the lab, you're not able to see the source. You're just able to see what level the nitrogen is at, what level the phosphorus is at. So that would be a complicated analysis. But oftentimes, if it's a kind of a glaringly obvious answer, like if a water body is right next to a farm where you have lots of runoff, you can kind of determine, oh, well, a lot of our nutrient input might be from excess fertilizers here. Whereas with Lake Charlevoix, we were trying to determine if those nutrients were, more so from a septic problem rather than, being adjacent to farmland or anything like that.
Great. How about the effect of salt from softeners on soil conductivity?
Yeah, that could definitely be impacting soil conductivity. I know that road salt, obviously in the winter, is an issue in terms of chloride contamination in water, but I had not thought about softeners before. So I would say that could definitely impact soil conductivity. It could raise those levels and make it more conductive and have a greater saline content. So
what would you consider number readings for phosphorus, nitrogen, chloride in, you're asking a policy person to, and I'm going to forget the term.
Micrograms per liter.
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I must have said milligrams per liter earlier. We use micrograms per liter.
Okay. So you already answered that one.
Oh, yes. I'm
okay.
sorry.
Okay. And then there was a comment, just some additional information that we tested 20 location surface waters on Lake Charlevoix in 2018 for HF 183, which was human fecal marker. And 5 of those 20 sites were positive for the human enteric bacteria.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And at that point, I don't see any other questions. So I will turn it back to Lauren. Thank you, Marcella.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Marcella. So we were able to make it through our presentations to give us a little bit of time for a break. So I'm going to call us back here at 11:05 on the dot, and then we will head into our breakout sessions. I really hope everyone is able to join us for that because I find them to be very valuable both for us and for the participants. So we will see you back here promptly at 11:05. Thank you.